study, you find that typically only 5 people or 10 people or 15 people were tested, which by market research standards isn't a lot of people.
What is it that neuromarketing is aimed at in the brain? Is it to get to the ancient part of the brain? What do you call that?
Well, I think there are different definitions. Again, there is a sort of a popular book about neuromarketing, actually of that same name, that talks about the reptilian brain. That's the one interpretation of the authors. It's also called the old brain. And what those authors are suggesting is that what you need to do if your marketing is to appeal to the emotional processing that goes on in the old brain, which could be fear, pain, and in a lot of cases, of course, today's fear and pain isn't what it was in the day of our early human ancestors. They're not worried about. We're not worried about saber-toothed tigers chasing us down and eating us, but we do have bosses. We have budgets to hit, time constraints, and so on, and these can behave, cause us to behave in somewhat the same way as these sort of ancient threats, and that's the point of these the authors of that book.
What is the name of that book?
It's Neuromarketing by Christophe Morin, and I'm sorry, I forget the name of the co-author. There's a co-author on it.
What does your site do? Neuromarketing, where brain science and marketing meet. Neurosciencemarketing.com. What do you do?
I do a mix of things. I try and chronicle what's going on in the neuromarketing industry. So if there are major news items related to employing EEG or brain scans and that type of technology, I'd like to bring them to the attention of my readers. But what I find is I often get a lot better response from my readers for some of the rather simpler things that really kind of relate to just observing human behavior and using that in your marketing. So, for instance, just yesterday, I did a post which is based on some rather interesting research done at the University of Michigan on the type font and how people's brains interpreted that font. And they gave people a very simple set of instructions. It was like 2 lines of and describing an exercise that people could perform. And they were asked to estimate how long it would take. And interestingly enough, if these 2 simple sentences of describing an exercise were in a very clear, easy to read font like Arial, they estimated that it would take about 8 minutes. But if those exact same words were in a font that was a little bit more difficult to read, a brush font, different group of subjects estimated that it would take 15 minutes. So to me, this type of stuff is fascinating, and I think a lot of my readers find it fascinating too.
I find it fascinating.
Merely changing the font that the instructions are printed in caused people to nearly double the estimate of time that the exercise would take, and also it reduced their willingness to commit to doing that exercise. And so if you're a marketer, that's really important to know. If you're trying to get people to do something, perhaps fill out a form, or if you're a nonprofit who wants people to volunteer for some kind of activity, you want to present that in as simple a way as possible, including a very simple font, because people will estimate that it will take less time. They won't be put off by it.
That's fascinating. What else have you found?
Oh, I could probably go on
share
for hours.
Share a couple things.
More interesting topics. I've have a sadly neglected wine blog, but one of the things that where the two have intersected is in people's perceptions of wine. What experimenters have found, and experimenters love to use wine. I'm not quite sure why. Perhaps they get to keep the leftovers after the experiment's done. But there have been some fascinating studies showing that, well, first of all, expensive wine tastes better. When subjects were served 2 different, they were told there were 2 different kinds of wine. One was a $5 wine, and one was a $45 wine, even though it was all what's called $2 chuck. It's a Charles Shaw wine product, very inexpensive, made in California. It's a bulk produced wine, and it's sort of seemingly the wine of choice for experimenters. What they found was that not only did people prefer the $2 chuck when they thought it was a $45 wine, but their brain's pleasure center actually responded more positively to it. So they didn't just think it tasted better. They didn't just tell the experimenter that it tasted better because they thought they should. Well, hey, this is expensive wine. I better not say this doesn't taste very good. But their brains actually perceived it as tasting better. And to me, that was a great lesson, not just if you're selling wine, but really about the power of expectations. The reason that so-called $45 wine tasted better was because people expected it to taste better. And regardless of what you're marketing, I think that suggests that you should be setting your expectations in a way because it will actually influence the way people perceive your product. So that's one wine story. And then another interesting wine story is at Cornell, they did a study where people were served they were in a French restaurant, and everybody was served the same fixed price meal. So everybody got the exact same food, and they were offered a free glass of wine with their dinner. Well, one group got a glass of wine that they were told was from Noah's Winery in California, and then the other group got some wine from Noah's Winery in South Dakota. Needless to say, California has a lot better reputation for wines. And once again, all the wine was actually $2 chuck, very inexpensive product. And what they found was that the people who got the glass of wine that was supposedly from California actually ate more food with their dinner, and they were more likely to rebook a reservation with the restaurant.
Fascinating.
So again, it's perception and expectation is really important.
That's generic in marketing, isn't it? But where does the neuro part of that come in, or is that just
that's
traditional? That's the tradition in marketing.
My definition of neuromarketing encompasses behavioral research because to me, it's what neuroscience is doing is merely expanding our view of psychology. In other words, psychology was always sort of a black box science. You never knew what was going on inside people's brains. You simply had to observe behavior. Sometimes you could apply a stimulus and see what happened and observe behavior in that way, but it was all a black box. And what neuroscience is doing is opening the black box. So for instance, in the first wine example, they actually used brain scans not just to record people's comments that, gee, this wine tastes better, but to look inside their brain and say, wow, the pleasure center in these people's brains is actually being lit up to a greater degree by the wine they thought was expensive. So it's underscoring what is observed just by monitoring their behavior and talking to people. And sometimes it can produce rather different information. Another type of looking at people is what's called facial coding analysis. And this I encompass in my definition of neuromarketing, even though it's more of a behavioral biometric type of analysis. The concept of facial coding analysis is that people have micro expressions, and that even when they're attempting to mask their true feelings, a skilled observer can pick up on little expressions or
nuances,
minute changes in their facial patterns, and determine what the underlying emotion really is. And in one case, and this is recorded in a book by Dan Hill called Emotionomics, a survey of consumers, a washing machine an appliance company did a survey about a washing machine feature that they were considering adding, and they asked consumers if they'd like it. And by and large, the survey results were very positive. But when the experimenters did facial coding analysis of those same people, they found that there was a rather negative reaction occurring, and that their conclusion was that even though people said, well, gee, this is a new feature, so I should probably like it, and they responded that way, their immediate reaction was that, gee, this is going to make it more complex, harder to use, and more likely to break. So that's an example where a neuromarketing technique got beyond what people are saying, and hopefully